I did.
Okay.
I think he's Rabbi David.
Hello. Sorry. Apologize for being late. Good to see everybody. So we're going at it at a double chapter speed here. We've got one more meeting after this of text, and then a final meeting of kind of talking together what we might have learned from this time. Whenever you think of something, when you're driving, or when you're walking, or when you're just lying up late at night and you can't fall asleep, just maybe write down or make note of the things that perhaps that we've been able to, each of us have been able to get out of this study together, so we can move forward and have some sort of an evaluation, as well as to how we did it as well. Way could we have done it in a different way, perhaps better? Okay, Steve, you want to bring us up to context?
Yeah, you bet. So we left, well, in the previous two chapters, we saw Paul before the Sanhedrin after he had been arrested on his return to Jerusalem with funds from churches in Macedonia and Achaia to support the Jewish Christian mission in Jerusalem. And yet the group from Asia who gave Paul constant trouble all through his early mission, they arrive in Jerusalem and accuse Paul of subverting their traditions, their faith, of inciting violence in the temple, and so forth. So he's dragged before the Sanhedrin, and then Paul turns it to a question of resurrection. There's Sadducees and Pharisees. The Pharisees begin to be more supportive of Paul at that move, because the Sadducees, as tradition tells us, weren't big believers in the general resurrection from the dead. At any rate, he goes before it turns out that the Roman tribunal and one of the Pharisaic scribes support Paul and suggest maybe he needs a fairer hearing and not just this mob trial. And that leads to a conspiracy to kill Paul, and it's exposed. So the tribune, Lysias, and he sends an army with Paul to protect Paul. It's overkill, but they end up in Caesarea, in Herod's palace, or in the jail where his palace was. And then the tribune sends a letter to Governor Felix at the time, and kind of giving the context while Paul is kept under guard. Then soon after, the high priest arrives in Caesarea, probably a Sadducee, to accuse Paul as a pest, as an outside agitator, if you will, and as the ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. Paul gives his defense. He says, I'm a good Jew in every way. I just have this hope for the resurrection. And then Felix adjourns the meeting, but soon returns with his wife, Drusilla, who the text says is Jewish. And they meet with Paul, and Paul says a few things. He gets a little freaked out about it, and he withdraws and keeps Paul basically in jail for 2 years, hoping for a bribe or something. Nevertheless, the 2 years pass, and in 60 Common Era, Porcius Festus succeeds Felix as the governor, and that's where we begin today.
Right. So thank you for that, Steve. And to if I just sum up what Paul tried to do was to turn this from a political issue into a theological issue. He wanted to go and say, this is an inner issue of the Jews. This doesn't threaten, my understanding, doesn't threaten the Roman Empire in any way. And this issue of resurrection, which in the background, of course, I think is hinting to the belief in Jesus, even though it doesn't talk about that specifically in today's reading either. That word that was used, what was it? Lapos? The word what he calls him like a cockroach. Do you remember the word, Steve?
I remember talking about it last week, but I don't
Yeah,
have
I had it down. I looked up the word a little bit. It turns out that in the Septuagint, that word is used basically, it's the generic term for all rascals, all hated characters in a story. So for instance, Eli's two sons or his sons who were that at the time of Samuel, they're called that same word, the cockroaches, or others. In Hebrew, it's often translates the term b'nai Belial, which is parallel in rabbinic literature to even satanic even. So yeah, it's very derogatory in the Greek that those that were reading the New Testament would have understood. Um, okay, and of course I'm not sure I heard right. Perhaps it's the Sadducees who don't believe in resurrections. The Pharisees actually do, right? It's the Pharisees once again showing Paul showing his own roots. So it seems he's using like a double card here. On one hand, he's a good citizen of Rome, right? He's an upstanding citizen. He needs to be dealt accordingly with the Roman authorities. On the other hand, he's also a good Pharisee in that he believes in resurrection and he emphasizes his respect for the law as well. Okay.
David, I was going through my old notes from Shia Cohen back when I was at JTS in the late 80s. And he was fascinated by what you hinted at, that there's little Christology in these last few chapters. And he made a lot of that. And I don't know what the insight was, but that seemed significant, as if Luke's making a defense really in much later time after the temple has been destroyed for peaceful coexistence with Rome as the newly emerging Christian church. That seems to be Luke's one of his agendas at the least.
That confuses me, Steve.
How so?
Because Jerusalem was destroyed in the year 70 of a common era.
Mm-hmm.
This book seems to have been written around what I have read, around 60 of the common era.
No, I think Ajit, at least the scholars that I follow, put this later after the Gospel of Luke, 70 to 80, some as late as 90 for the book of Acts. Which
then says Paul has already died. So this book is written after Paul has already been executed.
Sure, that's right. That's right. This is Luke's Paul. And then there's ongoing conversation, and it's really fruitful between Paul's actual letters and the portrayal and the understanding of Paul as Luke gives us. It's an interesting conversation. Don, you had a thought?
Yeah. Does anybody know how Paul became a Roman citizen to begin with?
And what were you saying about that?
How did Paul become a Roman citizen?
Pick somebody off.
You know, I used to know something about that, but I'm not sure what the pathways to citizenship were exactly. Does anybody know? Tom Bonnell, do you know, as a classic scholar?
I don't know for sure, but I think it's probably, the service, quite honestly, probably buying citizenship. I think that's the most likely possibility. It's just that somebody would make enough money somehow and would buy their citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was hinted at in that a few chapters ago when that point came up. There was something about buying citizenship. But it seemed to me as if Paul was saying, though, that because he was born in a particular place, born to a particular family.
In the province of Cilicia.
Yeah. Ajit, the dating in one of the more up-to-date commentaries that I've been using, Carl Holliday in the New Testament Library, he mentions there's some people even date this to 125, the first quarter, first half of the second century, but he's going for an 80s, more or less an 80s kind of a date, maybe even 90s. Some people say because there's so much parallel between, remember I said last week, or I'm not sure if you were here, but I said how it amazes me how helpful Josephus is in filling in the information. So Josephus didn't finish writing. So if Luke here or the author is dependent upon Josephus's writing, then that would make it even later into the latter part, the 90s.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else before we move ahead? Yes, please. Go ahead, Carrie.
All right, so when I started reading this, I thought you named it aptly that, and it goes on, because I started reading, I thought, this is what we read last week. I realized it's like the same story with different people. I mean, there's so much of it is this almost like exactly a repetition. I went back and looked at the previous chapter in my Bible to see, well, what was it we read? Well, yeah, it was Felix. Now we got Agrippa, and and he has his wife versus Drusilla, and I thought it was very repetitious.
Right. I think it may have been more interesting to the people that knew when they were reading this, the characters that were at work. Right. There's something even not gossipy, but there's something newsworthy about it. Agrippa's and his wife getting involved in who Bernice, who is she exactly? And did a little reading on her. She seems to be a rather colorful character who hooked up with not a few powerful men in her life. And so to my mind, that's why it keeps going. But I will admit, I was influenced. I met with my good friend, Father Andrew Green, many of you know, an retired Episcopal priest out here in the desert. We were meeting the other day, and I'm telling him where we are. He's always like, where are you guys up to? So I said, well, we're up to the end, and every time I think he says, yep, the thing about Acts is it just never seems to end. That was his point. So I guess that's something that's said in Bible circles in the Christian world. So shall we get to, and because you're so fascinated and so involved in the plot, Terry, you get to read the first part.
Okay. 3 days after Festus had arrived in the province, he went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem, where the chief priests and leaders of the Jews gave him a report against Paul. They appealed to him and requested, as a favor to them against Paul, to have him transferred to Jerusalem. They were, in fact, planning an ambush to kill him along the way. Festus replied that Paul was being kept at Caesarea and that he himself intended to go there shortly. So he said, let those of you who have the authority come down with me, and if there is anything wrong about the man, let them accuse him. Shall I continue?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
After he had stayed among them not more than 8 or 10 days, he went down to Caesarea. The next day he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. When he arrived, the Jews who had gone down from Jerusalem surrounded him, bringing many serious charges against him, which they could not prove. Paul said in his defense, I have no way committed an offense against the law of the Jews or against the temple or against the emperor. But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, asked Paul, do you wish to go to Jerusalem and be tried there before me on these charges? Paul said, I'm standing before the emperor's tribunal. This is where I should be tried. I have done no wrong to the Jews, as you very well know. Now, if I'm in the wrong and have committed something for which I deserve to die, I'm not trying to escape death, but if there is nothing in their charges against me, no one can turn me over to them. I appeal to the emperor. Then Festus, after he had conferred with his council, replied, you have appealed to the emperor you will go.
Okay, which is the stepping stone to the last stage, I guess, of the story of Paul, where he's going to be off to, which is to the emperor. Any feelings, questions, or things issues that these two paragraphs have raised?
So same old troublemakers, just keep coming back and, kind of following him along wherever he is. They seem to be there bringing some kind of charges against him. They're quite determined.
Never ending lawsuits.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Can I?
Oh, whoever was speaking, sorry.
Yeah, I am not aware of any time when somebody would have been sent to the emperor's tribunal to be tried. This is unique, and I'm not sure what to make of it, but I'm just not aware of anything like that, in Roman history.
So Thomas, we know from rabbinic tales, and I emphasize tales in this, of often certain rabbis meeting with certain dignitaries, right? Not with the emperor, but with, there are some stories, which I don't think historians take seriously so much as actually happened, but it's a way to lift up somebody's
Stature.
Yeah, stature, stardom. Yeah, I think, and it seems to me that that's kind of what's happening. That to prove, he's going to go all the way to the Supreme Court with this. In American terms. I don't know. What do you think, Steve? Would you?
Yeah, and well, I just go back to your encouragement for us to let the story be the story, and what is happening narratively in this story. What is the author trying to say? Terry hinted that it's this this mob scene that continually is just driven to kill Paul. The violence at the core of that, and how power operates through its judicial processes is fascinating. And so, power corrupts. How do you defend yourself against the powers that be? What is mob thinking like in all religions and all cultures when we gang up after demonizing the other, like they've done with Paul as the pest, the cockroach? So I think all of that is deep and spiritually fraught for me. But I just this procedural approach is fascinating.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That struck me is the respect for the rule of law. Festus saying, "Hey, you get to face your accusers. You guys come down with me if we're going to do this." And then he honors Paul's appeal and says, "You want to go to the emperor." So law was clearly, I guess, Roman law, I guess that would be, was very respected at that time.
Or at least that's what the narrator would have us believe with that generation. I'm sorry to be skeptical, but I think,
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say the following, that in the past, in this book, Paul has gotten out of trouble by claiming to be a Roman citizen. And here he is in trouble, and it seems like he's still in trouble, and he's not claiming Roman citizenship to get out of this trouble.
No, I think he claimed Roman citizenship to be tried by the courts of Rome as opposed to by the Sanhedrin. And in that way, Ajit, he's succeeding. And I think that the underlying motif would be of this is reason from a literary point of view is to show that the one who's going to bring it to Rome, who's going to bring the message in the widest possible sense, are not the local folks in Jerusalem in many ways. But I see a lot of Don wants to say something, and others. Go ahead.
I think I don't think he knew what to do with Paul. You have these intersecting things that are theological and legal. I mean, what do you do with this when you're a person in power? So I'm almost feeling like the guy's looking for a way out. Let somebody else handle the problem.
That's helpful, Don. I think the narrator goes out of their way to vindicate Paul, that he's really not guilty of sedition. He's really not guilty of blaspheming in the temple. He's really, and yet he's shuttled around like a pawn on a chessboard. So the narrator is telling us something about that contrast between what is that message? It's deep, it feels.
Okay, Don, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, we're on 13.
Yes, please.
Okay. After several days had passed, King Agrippa and Bernice arrived at Caesarea to welcome Festus. Since they were staying there several days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, "There is a man here who was left in prison by Felix. When I was in Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews informed me about him and asked for a sentence against him. I told them that it was not the custom of the Romans to hand over anyone before the accused had met the accusers face to face and had been given an opportunity to make a defense against the charge. So when they met here, I lost no time, but on the next day took my seat on the tribunal and ordered the man to be brought. When the accusers stood up, they did not charge him with any of the crimes that I was expecting. Instead, they had certain points of disagreement with him about their own religion and about a certain Jesus who had died, but whom Paul asserted to be alive. Since I was at a loss how to investigate these questions, I asked whether he would go to Jerusalem and be tried there on these charges. But when Paul had appealed to be kept in custody for the decision of his imperial majesty, I ordered him to be held until I could send him to the emperor. Agrippa said to Festus, "I would like to hear the man myself." "Tomorrow," he said, "you will hear him."
Okay, so let's pause a little bit about, is this a turn in the narrative? Is this the same old? Is this just it goes on, or is there something that's been added here? Agrippa, anybody? So Agrippa the Second, in the rather detailed family tree descending from Herod the Great, it's really unclear to me. I mean, I think, Tom, you do have a good grasp on.
I don't, David. I'm not sure, how he fits in at this point.
Yeah, so he's a governor. It's hard to tell from what, again, it's not my wheelhouse at all. Is there some, Steve, are you well versed with all the ins and outs of the kingship there, the king of Judea kind of stuff?
Just the governors, the procurators, the kings of the various districts. Agrippa, I think, came from the north, and then just the pomp and power of the players, and this constant question: what do we do with this singular human being who we can't square this circle? What's going on with him? So there is the question of his identity, just as the question of Jesus's identity was always central in the gospel text. It's like, who is this guy? That's the way the narrative is working on me emotionally. It's just his singularity in the midst of all the pieces.
You get another person with whom you can noodle with about this problem that may have an insight that would be helpful.
Well, so I hear what you're both saying, and Don, especially this keeping it in a professional way. I'm not sure. It's unclear to me that Agrippa had that kind of power. To me, this seems a little bit like modern monarchies in Europe. They're stars. They're stars. They have clout. They get, oh yes, of course we'll bring him to you. But I don't know there's much wisdom here. I mentioned Bernice before. She's a really interesting character. She's been around. She's hooked up literally with different men of power, including Titus, and been in Rome and was, this isn't her first rodeo, so to speak. So it's this stardom, this world of stardom and elites. And to my mind, what the function that this serves here in the narrative is, again, to increase the stardom of Paul.
Yeah.
Paul goes up in stature as somebody people are talking about, people want to meet, right?
Yeah, makes great sense.
Yeah. Okay, and so should we go on? Harold, you want to read 23?
So on the next day, Agrippa and Bernice came with great pomp, and they entered the audience hall with the military tribunes and the prominent men of the city. Then Festus gave the order, and Paul was brought in. And Festus said, King Agrippa and all here present with us, you see this man about whom the whole Jewish community petitioned me, both in Jerusalem and here, shouting that he ought not to live any longer. But I found that he had done nothing deserving death. And when he appealed to his imperial majesty, I decided to send him. But I have nothing definite to write to our sovereign about him. Therefore, I have brought him before all of you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that after we have examined him, I may have something to write. For it seems to me unreasonable to send a prisoner without indicating the charges against him.
Perhaps go on another paragraph?
Agrippa said to Paul, you have permission to speak for yourself. Then Paul stretched out his hand and began to defend himself. I consider myself fortunate that it is before you, King Agrippa, I am to make my defense today against all the accusations of the Jews, because you are especially familiar with all the customs and controversies of the Jews. Therefore, I beg of you to listen to me patiently. All the Jews know my way of life from my youth, a life spent from the beginning among my own people and in Jerusalem. They have known for a long time, if they are willing to testify, that I have belonged to the strictest sect of our religion and lived as a Pharisee. And now I stand here on trial on account of my hope in the promise made by God to our ancestors, a promise that our 12 tribes hope to attain as they earnestly worship day and night. It is for this hope, Your Excellency, that I am accused by Jews. Why is it thought incredible by any of you that God raises the dead? Indeed, I myself was convinced that I ought to do many things against the name of Jesus of Nazareth. And that is what I did in Jerusalem. With authority received from the chief priests, I not only locked up many of the saints in prison, but I also cast my vote against them when they were being condemned to death. By punishing them often in all the synagogues, I tried to force them to blaspheme. And since I was so furiously enraged at them, I pursued them even to foreign cities.
Okay, so even though we're in the middle of his impassioned defense, I want to just pause a moment. The reason I thought we would maybe do this as well is that this comes to explain a little bit more what Agrippa and Bernice are doing in the story, right? Bernice is there, I think, because she's a superstar. That's what that's the impression I get. And she happens to be with Agrippa. But Agrippa is considered by many to be Jewish. He's part of the Herodian line, which the rabbis, of course, were extremely doubtful even about Herod himself, his Judaism, originally from Edomian, but still they're considered to be part of the Jewish people somehow. It's interesting to me that Paul doesn't talk about the Jewish people. What does he? He does, but he uses the term at one point, all the 12 tribes. That's really interesting because there haven't been 12 tribes for hundreds of years by this point, right? It's been, the northern tribes were lost, and unless he wants to include perhaps the diaspora in that way, maybe he's thinking, maybe that's his way of saying, even more than the Jewish people, you think of the Judeans, it's all those that were lost, that hold the Hebrew Bible dear and part of the covenant, and they're where are they lost? They're lost in the diaspora. They've been exiled to different places. So I think that the character of Agrippa here is to allow Paul to be far more Jewish and to try to relate to his Jewish conscience, to Agrippa's Jewish conscience here. That's the way it seems to me, at least. Disagreements, comments, questions?
I have kind of an impression to give. I was sort of struck by the last sentence where he says, by punishing them often in all the synagogues, I tried to force them to blaspheme. And since I was so furiously enraged at them, I pursued them even to foreign cities. My impression of Paul is that that's fanatical. That he was a fanatic. And I'm not so sure that he wasn't a fanatic even after the conversion on the road to Damascus.
I applaud you being very select.
That was just part of his character, his personality.
I commend you on your sensitivity, Harold. I would have said it in a rougher way. He was an extremist then, he's an extremist now, and just in a different way. Still extreme, maybe not violent, but still extreme, and doing the same things he did as he presents himself here in a negative way to all the synagogues, to all the diaspora. He does it with more of a blessing than a curse, but still extreme.
I have a question, Rabbi, where he says, I cast my vote against them when they were condemned to death. Does that vote belongs to who? Belongs to ordinary Jewish community living in the Jerusalem area? Or
Yes.
does that belong specifically to somebody in authority and power? And the second question is, he's out there persecuting the Christians. So he says, by what authority? I mean, is he a cop? Is he a policeman? Who is he that ordinary Paul is out there persecuting the Jews, the Christians?
I can only answer part of this because I think maybe Steve and others may be able to answer from a larger picture, from reality or historically. But the way that it's presented here is that Paul is a messenger, an emissary of the court of the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem that are unhappy in Paul's earlier career, are unhappy with those that have been attracted to Jesus and that understanding of the way of Judaism. And therefore, he has the power to go out and find them wherever they may be. And the authority is seated on the Temple Mount in the Sanhedrin. That's my understanding. And then if you say, well, could they really put people to death under the Roman dominion? That's really up for grabs. I don't know where historians are today on that, but certainly when it comes to rabbinic history of late antiquity and the rabbis, that nobody really thinks that the rabbis were able to put to death anybody under Roman rule. Maybe there was an earlier time, maybe under the Maccabees they could, maybe in the beginning of Herod they could. But the idea was, at least as far as the stories were concerned, yes, you could put people to death for blasphemy. And his power derived from the Sanhedrin, and he did this as a Pharisee, right? That's if that answer. Now, I don't know historically if that was possible, but I don't know, Steve, how do you see it?
Just like you said it, I say amen to what you just said. I think historically it's up for grabs, and but you just explained what the narrative is saying, and the net effect for me is that Paul is basically saying that what I'm being accused by the same mindset that inspired me to accuse them earlier before my conversion, right? It's the mirror, the rage that I had, that's what they have, and it's misguided. It's I've learned I'm no longer that person. I'm still a Jew, and I'm proud of being a Jew and want to be a Jew, but I'm a Jew now in the koinonia with Jesus Christ, who has risen and as this text earlier said, is alive. And so it's Paul, then when you read his letters, he talks about the reconstitution of Israel, the new Israel, if you will. So yeah, I think this is an interesting reflection of what was in Paul's mindset. Now we see it arrayed against himself for those same reasons.
Terry?
Well, and stones were always available when they say they can't put somebody to death in terms of a trial and that. But you think back to Stephen, that was just kind of a mob that suddenly rose up and used the stones and killed him. So I would guess there's a lot of that. If Paul went into synagogues and stuff, he could probably stir up a whole lot of trouble against these people who were there. And, if they denied something or said the wrong thing, I could see people, which is exactly what was going on here. This is kind of a mob mentality. So it's still there. And if you pick up enough stones, you'll kill somebody, even if they're not tried in a Roman court, or that it's okay. And I'm guessing the Romans would kind of turn their eyes against that and say, that's a religious thing.
And I think a lynching is a lynching in whatever culture or religion it comes out of. The tragedy of this is that once this text becomes Holy Scripture, then forever it stigmatizes the Jewish people, right? In a way that I think is now weighted overly, in a tragic sort of way. Now that this has become, Scripture for 20 centuries.
Well, thanks for that comment. You'll notice, what is who's he fighting for here? What is he fighting for?
Freedom.
Well, that's personal freedom, but what's his ideological fight here? Please, I mean, you could say for Jesus, but what in particular?
I think the fight is to portray how a tradition has had pressure on it and forces on it to change to something different.
So the something different is what he's fighting for. What is that something different that he
It
mentions?
would be Christianity.
A little bit more specific. Christianity is a big, big word, right? It
Yeah,
includes.
it is. All right, well, let me say it this way then. How about Jewish Christianity?
Also too big. What does it mean? I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Don, but what does it mean to be a Jewish Christian in this time which is being described here, at least in this paragraph, according to Paul? Well, when you read the Gospels, you get a little bit different view, at least in Matthew, right? That's I'm most familiar with. What are the Romans upset about? How could Jews get the Romans to be upset about Jesus?
Yeah, if Jesus claimed to be the king of the Jews, if they turned it into something political, something seditious against the Roman Empire.
Right. So there's nothing here about that. There's also nothing here about Jesus as healer, which to me is, why, but maybe that's not, it's really just about Tchiat HaMetim, about resurrection of the dead kind of thing. And Jesus came back to life, and that possibility. That's the only thing that he mentions from an ideological point of view. Unless I'm missing something. Yeah, freedom is in the background, but freedom for what? What are you fighting for, right? That's what and maybe he says it this way only because he's speaking with Agrippas, and maybe Agrippas has sympathies for that particular ideology, that theology. I don't know, but I think the main point, my main point is what I brought up last week, is that he's shifted the whole thing from being political to being theological.
Mhm.
Yes,
I kind of find it.
I was going to say he's really fighting for not only his life, but everyone's life, because he believes that Jesus is the way to having everlasting life.
Although that's not what's said here, though that might be in the background, right? Don, you were starting to say something.
Yeah, it's amazing how I can see a relationship to what goes on today between evangelical Christians and progressive Christians as it relates to an older theology about Christianity, how the pressure is being exerted in a number of churches to move to something different, to address all the people that are leaving the church for something else. And so there is this pressure to come up with an alternative story to a past tradition. I see the same things here.
So I have a side question, which is going against what I usually say, to take this story the way it is. And Steve, maybe this is not the time, but when we do come to Paul as a figure, as a influencer par excellence, in Paul's theology or in his messaging, as we know from the letters, where does Jesus figure in quite a bit as the King and Messiah? This is an honest question. I just don't know.
I don't think he does. I think what it is he leaves, I'm just saying this, he leaves his spirit behind to a believing community and looks for a response.
Yeah, I think Rita Claire's right. He is fighting for to testify for a way of being in the world that's neither Jewish nor Gentile nor slave or master. You know, in his letters, it goes back to that koinonia, you know, and finding a way to bring a diverse group of people in Greco-Roman Jewish world into a community, a new community. And that's the appeal in all of his letters, whether we are one body with different parts, different beliefs, different ideas, nonetheless in Christ. And that's where he would promote the risen one. It's in Christ as Messiah who fulfills all that we have longed for, including freedom to be who we were created to be by God's grace, if you will.
The question I have is slightly historical. When did the term Christianity first come about? I mean, you know, in the letters you get the word Christians, but Christianity is a really different concept. I mean, far beyond Christians. Does anybody know when that first came about?
Well, some would say, Tom, just as soon as Constantine became emperor in the early 4th century, right, and declared Christianity as the religion of empire. And that was a whole different ballgame from that point on. But in terms of the earlier periods, in Acts at least, it turns out that those who were against Paul and Barnabas in that community that was forming in Antioch, which was just devastated by that earthquake, they're the ones who said, look at those Christianioi, those Christ
Christians,
ones.
right? Okay.
Yeah, but it was from their detractors who labeled them. They themselves, as we see, call themselves, followers of the way or the sect of the Nazarene. You know, it's a little different. It's not yet a new religion.
Another question.
Harold.
Getting back to the point about Paul moving this speech from a political to a theological, to having a theological bent, would that be where I see he said, I not only locked up many of the saints in prison. Is that the first occurrence of the word saint? It's not like there was a board that certified saints yet, or anything. So I'm wondering if that's part of his, a part of the theological, of making this theological as opposed to political.
Yeah, definitely. He is now siding with those very saints that he once was, right? Sure.
But I'm just wondering when
that word, I forget the exact word for that use or this interpretation of it, but
okay. I was just wondering when the term started to be used among Christians or Jewish Christians or.
Well, the word is the word what for set aside, right? It's the holy, it's the Holy One, and that's a thoroughly Jewish word in the way that it gets used. And then it's the later church that then identifies saints, right? But I think it was colloquially used, much like the word church, ecclesia, those who are called out to be holy. You know,
Okay.
you shall be holy as I am holy, says the Lord God. You know what I'm saying? It's that it's that being called into this new community, which is thoroughly rooted in Judaism and intends to be the fulfillment of Jewish of Judaism. But as we see, the tragedy intervened.
Yeah, the Greek here is polus ton hagion. Hagion, which would, yeah, with the holy ones actually, or the saints.
Okay.
Nomenclature used earlier to identify members of the Jesus movement. So apparently we've had that before in Acts and 9 and
Oh, okay. Okay.
in Romans and Corinthians. So yeah, but who knows exactly what? Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say we use it rather loosely today. We'll refer to someone, oh, he acts like a saint, or you know, so it's sort of making a little bit fun of the person that he thinks he or she is so perfect.
Mhm.
That's what my wife's been doing all these years. Yeah. Making fun of me.
Use
holier
it as a
than thou.
compliment.
Yes.
Ajit.
All right, so Ajit, how about reading for us from 12? We're in the middle of Paul's impassioned defense again in front of the superstars of the generation.
So verse 12.
12, yeah.
With this in mind, I was traveling to Damascus with the authority and commission of the chief priest. When at midday along the road, Your Excellency, I saw a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, shining around me and my companions. When we had all fallen to the ground, I heard a voice say to me in the Hebrew Aramaic language, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It hurts you to kick against the goads. I asked, who are you, Lord? The Lord answered, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But get up and stand on your feet, for I have appeared to you for this purpose, to appoint you to serve and testify to the things in which you have seen me, and to those in which I will appear to you. I will rescue you from your people and from the Gentiles, to whom I am sending you, to open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, so that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me.
Okay, comments.
What does goads mean? It hurts you to kick against the goads. What does that mean?
I think it's an expression of trying to get an animal. In the Greek here, it's again an ox or an animal pulling a cart to go, and they're stubborn, they don't move. I think that's where I mean, I was kind of hoping it was something else, but that's what I think.
It's a cattle prod, right?
Yeah.
And Paul, Saul, you've been kicking against the goads. You know, you've been goaded one way, and you've been denying it. You're not answering the call, or you're not letting me in. You've hardened your heart, whatever language works. And so stop kicking against the goads and receive this new revelation, is how I interpreted that.
Yeah, that's exactly correct, Steve.
Okay, Stephen Byrne, you want to read a little? We're in 19.
Okay. After that, King Agrippa, I was not disobedient to the heavenly vision, but declared first to those in Damascus, then in Jerusalem and throughout the countryside of Judea, and also to the Gentiles, that they should repent and turn to God and do deeds consistent with repentance. For this reason, the Jews seized me in the temple and tried to kill me. To this day, I have had help from God, and so I stand here testifying to both small and great, saying nothing but what the prophets and Moses said would take place, that the Messiah must suffer, and that by being the first to rise from the dead, he would proclaim light both to our people and to the Gentiles. You want me to keep going?
Well, just to Moses, until now, he has moved it from the political to the theological. Now it seems like he's ending with the theological aspect of it.
Oh, I forgot to ask something from the previous reading. And that has to do with the fact that Paul and his companions, they all saw the vision. It's not just Paul's vision. It's Paul and his companions. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's added here.
Okay,
Where they all fall, unlike the previous two times.
okay.
And
Don?
we had spoken one in the past about whether Paul actually had a vision of Jesus. And the words here do indicate that the Lord appeared to him.
Mhm.
And it was not something that he just heard.
And
as a-
on that basis declared himself an apostle,
Yeah.
would be
But-
one of
but
those.
I also think that he's carving out a role here too.
Yeah.
He's kind of giving himself a get-going speech.
I think my question is more or less this. I thought when Paul saw the vision, he was alone and became the apostle. And here what I'm seeing is that it wasn't just Paul alone, but it was his companions who must have all seen the same vision. That's what I'm commenting.
I don't see that.
Oh, okay.
George Hawkins,
Stephen Kinney.
introduce yourself, man.
Oh.
You're late.
Why,
to the
you've already
party.
done that.
Oh, you did?
No, you did.
Oh, okay.
I'm a follower, a disciple of the insightful and theologically hip Stephen Kinney.
Yeah.
Aren't we all?
Now Rita Claire,
Indeed.
he means that he's calling me a saint ironically, if you didn't pick that up.
But I think Ajit, so then the question would be, if this is new here, if we go with Ajit's reading, then what does it add? Why was it added at this part of the narrative if it's already appeared?
It says, I saw the brighter than the sun shining around me and my companions.
No, I'm
So
asking
that
you,
it wasn't Paul alone.
why? So why? I'm asking him. Now I hear what you're saying. Why would it be added here if in the past it wasn't?
I'm not sure, because this would indicate to me there would be more apostles than just Paul, if they all saw the same vision.
Terry?
Witnesses. He's got witnesses. It wasn't a private event. There are people who can confirm that this really did happen. I went back and looked at the beginning of Acts where Paul first tells about his thing and it says that the men who were traveling with Saul had stopped, not saying a word. They heard the voice, but could not see anyone. So it was, a little bit different for them, but they heard something happening and they were witnesses.
And again, maybe from a literary point of view, it brings the drama and without having to belabor the point previously where he goes and Ananias restores his sight and all that. I think maybe this is condensing all of that so that we get the feel for it, but he doesn't elaborate as much.
There's a physical manifestation too that dates back to Moses coming down from the mountain as well. The light. There's also a piece of it that kind of deals with the transfiguration in the Gospels too.
I'm going to bring us back to the story here where we've been around and basically we need to kind of finish up now. So if somebody could read 24.
I got it.
Go ahead.
While he was making this defense, Festus exclaimed, "You are out of your mind, Paul. Too much driving you insane." I think we all know people like that. But Paul said, "I am not out of my mind, most excellent Festus, but I'm speaking the sober truth. Indeed, the king knows about these things, and to him I speak freely. For I am certain that none of these things has escaped the notice, for this was not done in a corner. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets?" "I know that you believe," Agrippa said to Paul, and you are so quickly persuading me to become a Christian.
Maybe just the last line there?
Yes. Paul replied, whether quickly or not, I pray to God that not only you, but also all who are listening to me today might become such as I am, except for these chains.
A bit of performance here, right? This is kind of, yeah, it's political theater. Political theater, and he's got an audience. He has the audience of the aristocrats, of the height of it. He's able to, again, to show he tried in the land. He tried amongst the Jews, but he's got to go. His role, I think, is to be pushed onward to greater distances. And finally, maybe just go ahead and read that last part, if you could.
30, yes. Then the king got up, and with him the governor and Bernice, and those who had been seated with them. And as they were leaving, they said to one another, this man is doing nothing to deserve death or imprisonment. Agrippa said to Festus, this man could not have been free if he had appealed to the emperor. I'm sorry, if he had not appealed to the emperor.
This man could have been set free.
Right.
Okay.
If he had not appealed to the emperor.
This is where we hear the great chord of destiny being played in the sod. He's played his hand, but doesn't recognize, maybe doesn't recognize what he's asking for.
And it also enables him to go on to that other step, right? From a clever kind of yeah. Anyway, final words before we sign off for today. Yes, Rita Claire.
I can't help but think about these visions. I've always had a little bit of a problem with that. Yesterday morning, I was up quite early and I saw a beautiful, beautiful sunrise. And it, you know, when you see things like that, it kind of grips you. And I lost my husband a few months ago, and every once in a while, a shadow will cross over my vision. I guess what I'm trying to say is sometimes, don't you think how we feel about certain things that are going on in our lives could affect what we think we see?
Mm.
Most certainly, and that is that's kind of the nexus of where regular, let's call it physical vision and supernatural vision, or prophecy, or and what we dream and what we see. Of course, absolutely, yeah.
Well, the light, you know, of course, occurs in a bunch of places. I mean, certainly in the Roman world, but even today, near-death experiences frequently result in light. What it means, who knows?
I'd like to observe that whatever the Bible is not, it certainly is a text of psychology. And what this scene that Paul describes here is parallel to, echoing, evocative of the baptism of John and Jesus, where we hear the voice from the clouds saying, "This is my son, my beloved. Listen to her." What is the specific words? Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is these are the things that we are looking for in life. One is to hear from our Father that we are beloved and that He is proud of us. And the second is for God Himself to appear to us and tell us what our purpose is.
And speaking of God Himself, or God's self appearing, we're all going into Passover and into Easter, each of us with our own understandings and traditions of how God manifests God's self in this world, whether it's through liberation and freedom, whether it's through the harvest of crops and after the anxiety of the winter and being worried about whether we'll get everything in, whether it's the resurrection itself, resurrection of nature, resurrection of Jesus, or whatever may be celebrated in the Baha'i tradition at this time of year. I don't know if there's anything special, but It is our prayer, I think, together that we all find ways to identify some truth in the other person's camp. I'll just end with something that's in the background. We have one more meeting, which will be on the 26th, 27th of text, and then another one, as I mentioned. But for us to remember as we prepare our final thoughts, that which Professor Aviezer Ravitsky once taught at Hebrew University from the philosophy department, that there are three terms that we all want to talk about. One is tolerance, one is pluralism, and one is openness. And tolerance is when we as Christians and Jews and Baha'i and Muslims, we don't kill each other. We don't, we tolerate each other in very different understandings of the world and of God. But of course, Professor Ravitsky says, well, tolerance is all right, but let's talk about pluralism. Pluralism is which we each of us recognize the other's assertion and agency to say, this is my truth. And I can say, well, that is true for Steve. It's not true for me, but I respect his truth. But what Aviezer Ravitsky asks us to really strive for is openness. There was tolerance, pluralism, and openness. And openness is when I come and visit, we as Jews in the New Testament, in church, and the Baha'is come to a mosque and visit the Quran and the prayer in the mosque, and Christians come to a Hindu temple and say, you know what, there's some truth there for me as well. So not just tolerance, not just pluralism, but openness. And may this be a season of Easter and Pascha and Passover and whatever we may celebrate of openness. Amen.
And Rabbi, I'm heading to the Kotel.
You'll be there? Okay. If you're there still in May, Sasha and I might see you there, but okay.
And those three things, David, promote dialogue. And I'm so grateful for the dialogue we've been able to have over this past year. And so blessed Passover and Holy Week. And Ajit, God bless, brother.
I'll see you soon.
All right.
I'll
Hey,
see you.
friends. Be well.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Stephen, David, thank you all. Bye-bye.